Good morning. Welcome in. It is Sports by the Book on a Thursday morning. Happy to be with you as always. I'm Jeff Parles. Busy Thursday, the first one of October. We have one game three. Oh, thanks, Sean. We have one game three in the wild card series. We'll get into the Mets and the Brewers. As Ryan McCormick told me before the show, the Mets will be the first team in Major League Baseball history to play 5 games in 4 days, with 3 of them being playoff games. And let's be honest with you, 4 of the 5 are really playoff games. So high-stress baseball for New York. We'll get into it with our good friend Dan Szymborski, 910, all things baseball, the last 20 minutes of the show today with Dan Szymborski, breaking down not only just the Mets and the Brewers, but we know 3 of the matchups already in the division series, the Tigers, the Royals. Yeah, teams we expected to be in the division series at the beginning of the year are there in the American League, and the Padres just really mowed through the Braves. Got a little dicey late in that game last night, but San Diego moves on, and for the second time in 3 years, we'll take on the Dodgers in the NLDS. It's actually 3 out of 5, actually, for the Padres and the Dodgers in the NLDS. It's the rubber match, per se. Dodgers won in 2020. Padres, of course, won 2 years ago in 2022. All right. Before we get to all the baseball, let's get to football tonight. Let's go through the 3 games on the docket between the NFL and college football, and let's start in the National Football League. Week number 5 gets underway in the ATL tonight. The Falcons and the Bucs. Tampa last week with a really excellent bounce back after the disaster against Denver in week 3. The Bucs were dominant. They're up 3 scores right away on Philadelphia in that game. 33-16, the final a week ago. That game wasn't really even that close with the Bucs really putting it on the Atlanta Falcons, on the Philadelphia Eagles. The Falcons last week, Younghoe Koo, 54-yard field goal, good. Beating the Saints by 2, all number dependent. If you got early numbers in the week, you won on Atlanta. If you got late numbers, you lost. All number dependent, always, of course, the key of getting the right number in this thing. You look at this matchup tonight, starting on the Falcons side. Kirk Cousins, let's start there. Last week, that game was bizarre with the Falcons. They scored no offensive touchdowns. Their only touchdowns last week were that totally ridiculous play at the end of at the beginnings of the first quarter, where Shaheed fumbled a punt into the end zone that was recovered by Atlanta for a touchdown. The only way a muff punt can turn into a touchdown is exactly how that played. And then a pick 6 thrown by Derek Carr in the second quarter. Atlanta did not score on offense a touchdown. Kirk Cousins was average last week. 21-35, 238. An interception. They got into field goal range at the end because of a pass interference call. It wasn't even like Cousins made a play like he did in week 2 against Philadelphia, where he made multiple plays on that last drive. Bijan Robinson, we went back to Arthur Smith usage of Bijan Robinson. 3 times a charm, right? Bijan only had 11 touches last week. He went over just about 7 yards a touch, but he only had 7 carries. It was a very strange usage game for Bijan Robinson, and Algier had 8 carries for 60 yards and 2 catches for 20, so he had 10 yards a play as well. Atlanta, and the bizarre thing with this, Atlanta averaged 6.2 yards per play on offense. It was a very peculiar, for lack of a better phrase, a Falcon-like game where the only difference is they actually found a way to win the game as opposed to finding a way to lose the game from Atlanta a week ago. Their defense, I actually thought, played pretty well, all things considered, a week ago. New Orleans is only 5.2 yards per play. That's pretty good. Carr made the big blunder. They held Kamara in check. Olave was the one who had the big game for New Orleans. Taysom Hill, I know Sean loved 2 Taysom Hill touchdowns a week ago, but it was a bizarro game from Atlanta last week. And then for Tampa, as I mentioned, I just clocking Philadelphia. This is a critical game in the NFC South race. And I know that's early to say in only October and week 5. But if you're Tampa and you go to Atlanta and win tonight, you're 4-1, they're 2-3. you got the tie break early in the season. By the way, these two teams meet again before Halloween on October 27th, so it's 2 games in a month for these NFC South rivals. This is a big spot for Tampa to really put the hammer down in that division early and make it a lot more difficult. By the way, they get New Orleans next week off the mini bye. Make it a lot more difficult for everyone else in that division to catch you, especially with your only loss coming out of conference, which, again, obviously you don't want to lose any game, but if you're going to lose games, losing non-con games is not a disaster when it comes to tiebreakers. Luke Godeke is out, starting tackle yet again. Cansey on the defensive end is out for Tampa. 2 wide receivers, and Antoine Winfield, which we already knew. 2 wide receivers are out. Jalen McMillan out of Washington. Trey Palmer, who scored a touchdown a week ago. They're both out. So Sterling Shepard, former New York Giant, a former Oklahoma Sooner, now the number 3 wide receiver. I actually did take a piece of Anytime Touchdown at 5-1. Shout out to the You Better Your Bet guys for turning me on to that bet yesterday. Femi and Nick, as always, do a tremendous job. Atlanta only right now, I look. Troy Anderson's out, linebacker. Looks like Caleb McGarry is going to be able to play, which is good. Bijan is going to be able to play as well with that hammy. Falcons relatively healthy. I have nothing in the account right now except for that 5-1 play on Sterling Shepard at an anytime touchdown. I would only right now, if you're going from a traditional sense, and Ryan McCormick and I will have this breakdown further on Football Frenzy coming up at 3 o'clock this afternoon right here on the channel, I would only lean to the Bucs. That would be my only lean here. I think they're the better football team. And Baker Mayfield's been great so far, other than that disaster. Again, that Denver game is just a throw out the tape game at this point. That's the only way you could play it. Baker obviously was awesome against Washington. He was great last week again against Philadelphia. The mixed bag performances, even though they won in Detroit, and then obviously the bad one against Denver. This is a Tampa team that we just keep undervaluing. I thought this game should have came picked personally. So again, lean to Tampa Bay on a small money line price against the Atlanta Falcons. All right, the college games tonight. Troy and Texas State in the Sun Belt. Texas State, who obviously has had a lot swirling around that athletic program, declining a bid to the Mountain West earlier in the week. Texas State has lost 2 straight games. They lost that back on September 12th on that Thursday night to Arizona State. Tough loss, back and forth game against the solid Power 5, or Power 4, I should say. Showed me a lot, the Bobcats. And then they flip around, have a 22-0 lead after the first quarter last week against Sam Houston State, and end up losing 40-39. Just an absolutely brutal turn for Texas State where, look, I really think it's going to be hard at this point for the Mountain West champion, assuming it's UNLV or Boise State, especially if UNLV wins tomorrow night against Syracuse and just keeps running along. It's going to be hard to hold that Mountain West champion out of the automatic bid for the non-power conferences. But if Texas State went 12-1 and losses happened for UNLV, Boise, and those teams in the American, a 3-point loss against Arizona State as your only loss probably would have been enough to get Texas State in. Now they're done. They're not getting in with 2 losses. They just too many teams for them ahead of them with 2 losses now. Even Tulane, I think, should get in if they were to go 11-2 and win the American over Texas State. Troy, this is not your normal Troy team, which we're all used to Troy being a pesky, good mid-major. This team is not good at all. They're 1-4. Losing last week to Louisiana Monroe, 13-9. Their only win so far this year is a win against Florida A&M, an FCS team, and a bad FCS team at that. He lost at home to Nevada, got blown out against Memphis, gave 38 points to Iowa. This is not a good Troy team. The question in this game more than anything, because I'm looking at a total, can I get 21 points out of Troy? If I can get 21 points out of Troy, I feel pretty good about this game going over. Texas State's going to go into the 40s tonight. It's just a matter of getting there with Troy in this spot. If you get there, or if you get to 21 with Troy, I feel pretty good about this over at 57. Texas State's offense is still really good. It was the defense last week that failed them in that collapse against Sam Houston State, which, speaking of the Bearcats, Sam Houston State also in action tonight on the road in El Paso taking on UTEP. UTEP also a busy week for them, not necessarily just the football program. UTEP is, of course, going now to the Mountain West in 2 years. UTEP 0-4. UTEP 0-4 on the year. Sam Houston, year one in FBS, not good. This year, 4-1 so far for the Bearcats. 10.5 and 50 on this game. Now with the hook, it would only be a take of the minors with UTEP, but it is a dangerous, dangerous game when you're dealing with a bad team like UTEP in this one at 10.5 would be the only way I would look to play that one tonight at the Sun Bowl. Always a fun place to watch a football game. All right, we'll take a quick break and we get back. Baseball the rest of the way. Dan Szymborski will join us next. Fangraphs ESPN. A Game 3 in Milwaukee and 3 division series already set. We break them all down with Dan Szymborski next on Sports by the Book.
We have 11 amazing restaurants featuring a wide variety for every price range and appetite. South Point's Garden Buffet has something for everyone at unbeatable prices. Or, if hunger strikes in the middle of the night, join us at Coronado Cafe. The American menu offers breakfast, lunch, or dinner 24 hours a day, plus a Chinese kitchen for authentic Chinese dishes from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. From steak and eggs to wonton soup, it's fast and friendly service 24/7. When you need a quick pick-me-up, you can find it at our state-of-the-art Starbucks just inside the main South Point entrance. Order ahead with the Starbucks app for easy mobile order pickups. Or enjoy your favorites in the relaxing dining area anytime, day or night. If you love Mexican food, Baja Miguel's has all of your south-of-the-border favorites. There are dozens of classics to choose from, like fajitas, ceviche, chimichangas, tacos, and more. And for spirit lovers, Baja's colorful non-smoking tequila bar is right outside. South Point Casino has plenty of attractions for the whole family. Catch a movie. Our 16-screen movie theater includes 2 XD Extreme screens for the ultimate in viewing, sound, and luxury. After the show, treat the family to a variety of treats at our old-fashioned ice cream parlor, Kate's Corner. We scoop up a variety of creamy concoctions, including smoothies, hand-dipped cones, milkshakes, malts, sodas, and sundaes. At Kate's, there's something for everyone. And if you've still got time to spare, our bowling center might be right up your alley. Voted Best of Las Vegas, it's a great place for friends and family fun. 64 lanes, a pro shop, snack bar, and arcade. And while the kids are bowling, you can play slots and sip on a drink in the Alley Cat Lounge while overlooking the lanes. For our more serious and professional bowlers, the South Point is also home to a separate tournament bowling plaza.
Welcome back in Sports by the Book, South Point Studio. Jeff Parles. Another 15 minutes or so for us today. Then we'll, of course, hand the keys off, no pun intended there, to Gone Racing. Jeff Motley, Brendan Gone, get you ready for the week in NASCAR. Only a few weeks away from the race here in Vegas. Always a fun time up at the Speedway north of the city. Now joining us, you see his work on Fangraphs. You see it on ESPN as well. One of my favorites, Dan Szymborski, with us right now, of course, talking Major League Baseball here. Dan, it's a pleasure to have you. And it looked like for a good moment there yesterday, we were going to have no Game 3s to talk about today. And the Brewers with a Jackson Chourio solo home run, and then Garrett Mitchell, of all people, a 2-run homer to put the Brewers ahead for good last night against my Metropolitans, a 5-3 win for Milwaukee. And we get a Game 3. And the Mets have played now 5 games in 4 days. Send Jose Quintana to the mound tonight. Meyers will go for Milwaukee. The Brewers right now are pushing $1.30 right now in the market, Dan, as the favorites in this Game 3.
I'm really glad we got a Game 3 because I don't like extra bonus days off. I have no idea what to do on those days off.
So what are we looking at in this game, Dan? Because like I said, the Mets have played. This is game 5 in 4 days for New York, of course, all but that second game in Atlanta, high stress. Brewers, let's be real, other than these 2 playoff games, it was kind of lollygagged to the finish because they clinched the NL Central very early this year. It does feel like a little bit of an advantage to the Brewers, even with the usage of their bullpen so far in this series.
Yeah, you have to like where the Brewers stand. I mean, a lot of, fans who don't really dig in might not know the name Tobias Meyers, but he was pretty terrific this year. I really like him on the mound. I think the question that we see in Brewers Mets is, will the Brewers get to Quintana? Because Quintana is a guy who allows a lot of balls in play, and that's a bigger problem in Milwaukee than it would be in New York. He's a pitcher that survives the best in pitchers' parks more than the average pitcher. And you look at the Brewers lineups, and they have some guys who can really crush some lefties. Rhys Hoskins can still do that. William Contreras, you look at that lineup from top to bottom, and they have a lot of guys who can take out a lefty. So if he survives, the Mets have a pretty good shot. I think the Mets bullpen is kind of underrated, but the Brewers could get to Quintana very quickly.
I just want to ask you with this whole series so far, where it's really been the shoe's been on the other foot for both of these teams. The Mets have been the boppers this year. They have no homers so far in this series. Last night, the Brewers were the one with the homers. Obviously, Cheerios both, and the winner by Mitchell. Just how much into account do you take something like that into a winner-take-all game where it's, again, pitchers are probably going to be asked to go shorter than usual. The hooks will be quicker in a game 3 winner-take-all scenario.
I mean, it's not the largest factor. I think at the end of the day, you expect the teams generally to play towards their usual form. There's only, in a baseball game compared to a football game, there's only so much you can do to really change your win conditions, we'll just call them. I think that the Brewers, they can get to Quintana, as I said before. It should be a good game, I think. I wouldn't count the Mets completely out, of course.
Dan, for Philadelphia, who's waiting, if you're the Phillies, of course, I know seeing the Mets would be something wild there at Philadelphia. But if you're looking from the Phillies' perspective, I don't think it matters who they play. They will be big favorites regardless. But who do you think is the easier matchup for the Phillies based off of the winner of tonight?
I would definitely want to go up against the Mets. I think the Mets are tired. They have used a lot of their bullpen. The Phillies do have those arms, and I think the Brewers are kind of unpredictable because one way you can get to a high-quality pitcher, and the Phillies, of course, have a high-quality rotation, is home runs. If you look at like meltdowns from terrific pitchers in the postseason, like Justin Verlander and Clayton Kershaw, it's not walks or strikeouts that get them. They usually are around their normal rate. It's the home runs. And the Brewers do have a couple guys, more than the Mets, I feel, with a few exceptions, that can take any Philly, just surprise them with a couple of home runs, and all of a sudden it's a whole new series. So if I'm a Phillies fan, I'd rather see the Mets. Plus, the Mets haven't had their moment of tragedy yet this year, and that's always a thing for the Mets, that intersection of tragedy and comedy.
Well, I mean, the month of May did exist, Dan, but it was it was a little bit different at that point. Obviously, games not quite as important as these right now. Let's just shift to the other NL series. Dan, this is a mega series for the NLDS. The Padres and the Dodgers for the third time in 5 years. Dodgers are a minus 140 favorite behind me here at the South Point. Padres plus 120 on the take back. I'll just ask you this before I ask you your pick in this series. How big of a role do you think the Joe Musgrove injury could play moving forward for San Diego?
It could be a really big deal because one of the advantages the Padres had over the Dodgers was they were fairly confident about the health of the rotation, while the Dodgers have been trying to kind of duct tape the rotation every point this season. They just get essentially whoever is healthy at any given time is who the Dodgers have put on the mound. And having that, a really solid front three, front four, I think was something that the Dodgers didn't really match up well simply because of the surroundings. Now, all of a sudden, you're short a pitcher. And I think it might be a bigger deal if you get to a best of 7, but even in a best of 5, I think that does take away one of the Padres' edges over the Dodgers. And you kind of need an edge over the Dodgers. They still won the most games in baseball this year.
Just to go on a Dodger rotation into things real quick, obviously just a ton of injuries throughout the year. Jack Flaherty will get game 1. Yamamoto will get game 2 for the Dodgers. Just if the Dodgers were to split these first 2 games, Dan, even without Musgrove, that is a tough hill to climb for the Dodgers in that scenario. And again, the Padres are throwing Yu Darvish and Dylan Cease in these first 2 games. These are coin flip games and coin flip matchups with these pitchers.
Yeah, I think that the first 2 games show the Dodgers at their best because you have Yamamoto back and healthy, and Jack Flaherty's been healthy all season. When you get past there, all of a sudden, that's where the mismatches happen. You look at the rotation after the first 2, and there are serious questions for the Dodgers. And if you now suddenly have a question on the Padres side, that kind of the gold at the end of the rainbow isn't quite there anymore. So then it makes these not falling behind 2-0 an even bigger deal than it would otherwise be. So I still like the Padres, and I think that it's a closer series than many think, but losing Musgrove would be a serious problem.
Dan, going over to the American League side, let's start with the team that was not supposed to be here, but here they are, ending the Astros run of all those ALCSs since 2017, and here they are with the Detroit Tigers, who were 10 games under 500 not too long ago, and now they're in the American League Division Series. And Dan, they're a smaller underdog than I expected here. Guardians are minus 125, Tigers plus 105 behind us. There's a lot of minus 115, minus 105 in the market. Dan, I think this price all just comes back down to the fact that a lot of people are anticipating, and we likely will get it, Tariq Skubal in Game 2 and a potential winner-take-all Game 5 with Detroit and Cleveland.
One of the things about Cleveland that I noted from the projections is that they were a team that profiles better in a regular season marathon than a postseason sprint. The problem that happens for Cleveland is in any postseason scenario, they will generally have the weaker starting pitching in the various matchups. Now, of course, it depends how confident the Tigers are after Skubal, because while they had a pretty solid rotation this year during the wild card series, as Hinch said, it was Skubal and then chaos. And stretching chaos for 5 games is trickier than 3 games. The Nationals did that back in 2019 with their bullpen when they had 2 relievers they could trust, and so they kept throwing half the rotation into the bullpen. But I don't think the Tigers have quite as many arms, because the Nats then had Scherzer, they had Strasburg when he was healthy, they had Patrick Corbin at a time where you wanted Patrick Corbin.
Mm-hmm.
So if the Guardians can get to Skubal, the series could be pretty short. But I think Skubal right now is currently on average the best pitcher in baseball. You send Detroit out to a 1-0 lead. They if he gives them 6-7 strong innings, all of a sudden that bullpen looks a lot rested. They can do another bullpen game or 2 even, given the depth. I think it's a fairly close matchup. I actually have the Tigers as a slightly better playoff team than Cleveland.
And I'll just ask you this real quick, just with the Guardians. You mentioned again their starting pitching isn't great, but that bullpen has been historically good so far this year. Is there anything to the model? I know you love when I bring up these sort of teams, but the 2014-2015 Royals model, which was just get through 5 innings with the starter and then let the dominant bullpen take over.
Oh yeah, that if they have the lead, all of a sudden the Guardians are the favorites, because the bullpen has been unstoppable from really the first 5 or 6 guys have been unhittable this year. Maybe arguably 7 guys. I think that getting that lead might be tricky because, again, you look at that rotation and it's not that exciting at all. So And if they're behind, it's not super helpful. Now, if all of a sudden Tanner Bybee has a terrific start or something, and then Cleveland can lock it down, that'll be kind of their win condition. But I do think these teams are closer than the market does right now.
Dan, let's go to the last series on the board. The Royals sweep the Orioles despite only scoring 3 runs in 2 games. Shout out to the Baltimore offense just not showing up in that series at all. I know that doesn't please you at all, the resident Oriole fan, Dan Szymborski. But they get the Yankees here, and you know what, Dan? I look, there's something to playing with house money like Kansas City is. 106 losses a year ago, and now in the playoffs. They have 2 really good starting pitchers, and it looks like Cole Reagans is going to be okay, even though there was some concern about the hammy when he left game number 1 against Baltimore. But, Dan, it really feels like the Yankees caught a break with drawing Kansas City as opposed to the Orioles, who happen to have the Yankees' number this year.
Yeah, any team can beat any other team in baseball in a 5-game series. You could send the White Sox into the playoffs, and they would win a series once in a while. I think the Yankees, as long as they're healthy, they're an extremely dangerous team. They're always a risky team because all of a sudden you lose Judge or Soto to a hammy pull, or Garrett Cole's arm acts up again, or Carlos Rodon's arm, given his history. All of a sudden that team looks a lot worse. But I think when it comes down to it, the Royals are probably the weakest team in the playoffs, and the Yankees are arguably the strongest team in the AL, especially of the teams that are left. I might have argued a little about Baltimore, but that's a whole other issue. I think the Yankees, it's not going to be a walk, and it's a 5-game series, so anything can happen, but I would take the Yankees pretty strongly.
The Yankees about a $2 favorite behind us right now, minus 200, plus 175 on the take-back for Kansas City. If the Royals were to pull this upset, Dan, is it just simple as the Yankees just don't hit in this series?
I think that might be the case, because if you somehow stop Judge and Soto, then the lineup looks quite mortal. These two have carried the offense as much as any 2 players can carry a baseball team offensively. You almost wonder if not for them being both in the lineup, if you get the Barry Bonds intentional walk treatment. But if teams knew how to shut down Judge and Soto, they probably would have done that by now.
Dan, before we let you go, obviously we have one more slot to be filled before the final 8 here in Major League Baseball. But as of this moment, who do you have playing in the World Series, Dan?
It seems very retro, but I still have a Dodgers-Yankees World Series.
Okay, chalk for our friend Dan Szymborski with the Yankees and the Dodgers 1v1, which would be starting out in Los Angeles with the Dodgers having home field throughout the postseason. He's Dan Szymborski, Fangraphs, ESPN.com. Of course, he created Zips as well, at D. Szymborski on the tweets. Dan, pleasure as always, man. Thanks for hanging with us this morning.
Always fun, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Dan Szymborski, everyone. By the way, real quick, from my perspective, just on this Met-Brewer game, that was a brutal opportunity for the Mets to miss last night with a lead in the 8th inning. Phil Maton, of course, giving up the 2 gopher balls to give the Brewers a 5-3 lead, and that was more than enough with Devin Williams to close it out in the 9th. I still lean to the Mets tonight. This thing is so even, though. If you told me Tobias Meyers came out and threw 5 shutout and the Mets are in a 2-0 hole through 5 and the Brewer bullpen shut him down, it wouldn't shock me either. But this is just such an even matchup when it's all said and done. And I will say this, even though Dan said that the Phillies would rather see the Mets, I think the Phillies would rather see the Brewers, in all honesty. I just think that Brewer rotation, the Phillies will mash it all the way through. The Mets rotation, even with their issues, I think is a little bit better than the Brewers when it's all said and done. I lean to the Mets tonight, but not a lot of confidence in that winner-take-all scenario at AmFam Field tonight in Milwaukee. All right, before we get out of here, we'll check in, as we always do, our good friend Ryan McCormick. He is, look at you, all bared out today.
252 today, so I'm
Makes
wearing
sense.
my former Bear Khalil Mack jersey, 52. But I'll be rooting with you with the Mets tonight. Against the Brew Crew, but today on Punchlines at Punchlines FN, separate YouTube page. Frank Nicotero, obviously, is the host. Comedian friend of his, Bill Dwyer, who hosts
Nice.
BattleBots in town and has done some things game show wise. We're going to be talking a good amount of sports with him, talking about the postseason baseball, the NFL games coming this weekend, college football, and he is from Chicago, so I will get to talk a little Bears and Cubbies, so we'll see how it goes. But noon at Punchlines FN, again, separate YouTube page. Got to come by. We're going to have some fun.
It is going to be a fascinating night in Major League Baseball. It's also going to be an interesting night in the NFL as well. That's a good football game tonight on a Thursday where, again, people just see the NFC South teams like, oh, that division sucks. No, these teams are actually pretty good tonight. You and I will break that down in full when we are on Football Frenzy coming up at 3 o'clock, of course, right here on the Sports by the Book channel, and at noon. Like it says on the bottom of the screen, like Ryan said, Punchlines FN for Punchlines coming up at noon. Gone Racing comes your way in 30 minutes on the South Point studio page. Jeff Motley, Brendan Gahn, get you ready for the week in NASCAR, squarely in the postseason now for the fellas on the track. I'm Jeff Parles. Big shout out. Ann, Sean, Vinny, all here today, or Vincent, I should say, all here today, as always, making sure we're somewhat in line on this show. See Ryan and Frank at noon, Punchlines FN. See Ryan and I at 3, Sports by the Book. This has been Sports by the Book here in the AM edition.